On the evening of Christmas Eve in 1945, George and Jennie Sodder, along with their 9 children, went to bed, filled with excitement and anticipation for the upcoming holiday season. But as the clock ticked on, something sinister was lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike. In the early hours of the morning, a fire broke out. George and Jennie and 4 of their children managed to flee the burning house, but the other 5 were nowhere to be found. Welcome! Hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. George Sodder, whose birth name was Giorgio Soddu and who was born in Tula, Sardinia, on November 23, 1895, moved to the United States when he was a teenager. Giorgio changed his name to a more Americanized version and secured employment with the railroad in Pennsylvania. After some time, George moved to Fayetteville, West Virginia, and married Jennie Cipriani, another immigrant from Italy. By 1945, the couple had produced 10 children, whose names were John, Joseph, Marion, George Jr., Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jennie, Betty, and Sylvia. Joseph was in the military at the time, fighting in World War II. They bought a house and immediately became part of the town's thriving Italian immigrant community. In the years following George's business success, his family rose to prominence among the area's respectable middle class. However, George's openness to the world and unwavering convictions often brought him into conflict with those around him. He was particularly vocal in his criticism of Benito Mussolini, who was the dictator of Italy at the time and a well-liked figure among the Italian immigrants who lived in Fayetteville. In 1945, the Sodder family's Christmas Eve got off to a happy start. George, Jennie, and 9 of their 10 children were present at home. The children were brimming with excitement and holiday cheer, particularly after Marion, the eldest daughter, returned from work with more gifts for the family. Around 10 p.m., George and Jennie retired to bed, taking their youngest child, Sylvia, along with them. At around midnight, Jennie was stirred from her slumber by the sound of the phone ringing. When she went downstairs to answer it, a woman's voice greeted her and asked for someone who didn't live in the house. Jennie politely informed the caller of the incorrect number and hung up. She noticed that the downstairs lights were still on and the curtains were open. She promptly turned off the lights and closed the curtains before heading back to bed. Shortly after, at 1 a.m., Jennie was once again awoken by a loud noise on the roof, followed by an object rolling off. She didn't hear anything else and went back to sleep. She was once more awakened by the smell of smoke 30 minutes later. In a state of panic, Jennie woke up George, and together they quickly left the room. Upon inspection, the hallway was discovered to be engulfed in smoke, while flames ravaged the staircase leading to the children's bedrooms. The fuse box and phone line in George's office seemed to be the starting point for the fire. The couple sent out a frantic call to the rest of the household, urging them to leave immediately. George hurried past the older children as they made their way downstairs to get to the younger ones in time. Unfortunately, the fire had spread too quickly, and George's path was obstructed by burning debris before he could reach the younger children's room. George was trapped outside the house, and he desperately tried to reach the upstairs windows where the children were, but the ladder he usually used was nowhere to be found. He hurried towards his trucks, hoping to use them to help the children escape, but to his dismay, both of them failed to start, even though they had been in perfect condition the day before. With no other options left, he decided to climb the wall barefoot and broke an attic window, injuring himself in the process. But the fire had already spread, and all they could do was watch helplessly as the building collapsed around them, seemingly consuming the other children inside. In the middle of all the chaos, Marion, the oldest daughter, ran to a neighbor's house to call the Fayetteville Fire Department, but her desperate pleas for help were met with silence. Another neighbor tried to get in touch with the police from a local bar but got no answer. This neighbor then raced into town and hunted down Fire Chief F.G. Morris. The fire station was only 2.5 miles away, but by the time the crew arrived at 8:00 a.m., all that was left of the building was a smoking pile of rubble. A rapid investigation by the authorities led them to the shockingly quick conclusion that the children had perished in the fire. They chose not to delve any deeper into the tragedy, and by 10:00 a.m., the investigation had ceased. As George Sodder and his family tried to make sense of what had happened to them, he kept thinking back to the strange events that had occurred just before the fire. A homeless stranger had recently shown up at their door, offering his services in exchange for hard labor. George had shown compassion for the man despite his outward appearance and had let him roam freely on their property. The stranger had then warned George that the fuse boxes on the wall were defective and could cause a fire someday. And if that wasn't creepy enough, an insurance salesman had also knocked on the Sodders' door, trying to convince them to buy family coverage. The man's initial aggressiveness quickly morphed into something much darker. In a chilling warning, he had told George, quote, "Your goddamn house is going up in smoke, and your children are going to be destroyed. You are going to be paid for the dirty remarks you have been making about Mussolini." These events leading up to the fire seemed to be a series of ominous signs that, in hindsight, George wished he had taken more seriously. George and Jennie Sodder believed that Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jennie, and Betty had been kidnapped, and they tirelessly looked for them. George was so determined to find his missing kids that he hired a private investigator to follow any and all leads. The investigation led to a shocking revelation. The insurance salesman, who had warned George that his house would soon burn down, was a member of the coroner's jury that deemed the fire an accident. This same jury had attributed the cause of the fire to faulty electrical wiring, despite the fact that George had taken steps to check the wiring in response to the threats he had received. On top of all that, the Sodders heard that the fire department had discovered bones on their property and kept them a secret. The couple confronted Fire Chief Morris, who claimed he had buried the remains, including a heart, that had been discovered on the property after the fire. The Sodders, however, were not convinced and sent off samples of the skeleton and heart for laboratory analysis. Neither the heart nor any of the bones could have belonged to any of their children, as testing revealed that it was actually a beef liver. To give the grieving parents some peace of mind, Chief Morris did eventually admit to lying about the heart. Jennie Sodder knew death was a real possibility, but she couldn't come to terms with there being nothing to bury. Something wasn't right, and she began to fear that her children's whereabouts were being kept secret. Jennie turned to an unconventional method to support her theory because of her suspicions. She gathered livestock bones and ignited them, attempting to recreate the same circumstances that supposedly caused her children's demise. Yet no matter how many times she tried or how brightly she burned the fire, the bones refused to disintegrate into ashes. Jennie then consulted a professional from a local crematorium. The expert explained that, despite being exposed to high temperatures, human bones are able to survive for a significant amount of time after a body has been burned. The flames that had engulfed the Sodder family's house were nowhere near the intensity and duration required to obliterate all traces of bone matter. In 1947, the Sodders' desperation led them to pen a heartfelt letter to J. Edgar Hoover, then director of the FBI, pleading with him to take charge of the investigation into their children's disappearance. Their emotional appeal captured Hoover's attention, piquing his interest in the mysterious case. Despite his willingness to assist, Hoover made it clear that he did not have the authority to intervene, but that the FBI would be happy to take over the search if the local authorities asked for and granted permission. Both the Fayetteville Police and Fire Departments turned down the couple's request for assistance in the search for their children, leaving them to carry out the search on their own. After the tragic fire, there were numerous reports of sightings of the missing children. Someone in Florida said she recognized Louis from a magazine photo. A woman in Texas also saw someone who looked a lot like Martha at a restaurant. These reports gave the Sodder family reason to hope, and they kept following any leads they could find. One of these leads even took George all the way to New York, where he saw a photograph of a girl who bore an uncanny resemblance to Betty. He was so convinced that this was his daughter that he attempted to meet her, but the girl's parents refused. Although they hit dead ends at every turn, the Sodder family refused to give up on their quest for answers. They distributed flyers with pictures of them and an initial reward of $5,000, which was later doubled for information leading to the safe return of even one of the missing children. In 1952, a billboard was erected in the backyard of the house. Years of tireless searching had yielded no results until one day in 1968, when Jennie received an envelope in the mail. The letter had a postmark from Central City, Kentucky, indicating its origin, but no return address. Inside was a photograph of a young man who bore a striking resemblance to Louis. The back of the photo was inscribed with a mysterious message: "I love brother Frankie, I lil boys. A90,132.35. Even though the authorities thought the photo was a cruel joke, George and Jennie were still sure that it was proof that Louis was still alive, so they went ahead and hired yet another private investigator to follow up on that lead. The investigator took their money and disappeared, dashing their hopes once again. The following year, at the age of 73, George passed away. Jennie stayed in the house after George's, tending the garden that had replaced their home. Despite the passage of time, her grief remained, as evidenced by her decision to wear black for the rest of her life in mourning. On February 15, 1989, at the age of 85, Jennie passed away. George and Jennie never stopped believing that their missing children were still alive. The year 2021 saw the passing of Sylvia, the sole survivor of the Sodder family, who, as a mere toddler, witnessed the devastating fire that consumed her family home. A lot of time has passed since that terrible night in 1945, but some people still hope that the truth will be found so that one of the biggest mysteries in American history can finally be put to rest. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel.